There is a silence that exists on one side of the glass, a quiet, desperate silence, filled with the hum of a refrigerator and the weight of bills on a kitchen table. It is the silence of the majority. On the other side of the glass, there is a different kind of silence. The serene, powerful silence of a study in a large, quiet home, a silence punctuated only by the sound of an asset paying for itself. This is the silence of the few. Most people believe money is a resource, a tool. They are wrong. Money is a shadow. It does not follow you. It follows your character. It is a manifestation of your internal world, your principles, your fears, your relationship with power. The world is not divided into the lucky and the unlucky. It is divided into those who understand the fundamental nature of the game, and those who are its permanent, willing players. The rich are not better people. They are simply people who have accepted a different, colder set of truths. They have learned to see the board, while you have been taught to see only the pieces. This is not a story about greed. It is a story about awakening. It is about the moment a man named Leo stepped out of the shadow and decided to cast his own. Leo lived in the quiet silence. For 12 years, he had been a dedicated, competent, and ultimately invisible cog in the machinery of a mid-tier marketing firm. His world was a carefully curated landscape of beige cubicle walls, the stale scent of coffee, and the soft, persistent glow of a computer screen that held his financial destiny captive. He was a good man, a kind man. He believed in the principles his father, a man of similar quiet dignity and modest means, had taught him. Work hard, be honest, keep your head down, and eventually, you will be rewarded. His reward was a salary that, like a tide that never quite reached the shore, always seemed to recede just before it could cover the landscape of his life. He made $55,000 a year. After taxes, health insurance, and the mandatory 3% contribution to a retirement fund that felt like a distant, abstract concept, he took home about $3,200 a month. His life was a masterclass in arithmetic subtraction. Rent for his one-bedroom apartment, $1,400. Student loan payment, $300. Car payment and insurance, $450. Utilities, phone, internet, another $300. Groceries, $400. That left him with roughly $350. This was the territory of contingency, of a flat tire, a dentist's copay, a birthday gift for his mother. It was a life lived in the negative space, defined not by what he had, but by what he could lose at any moment. He was a responsible tenant in the house of his own life, but he did not own the deed. His desires were simple, and in their simplicity, tragically common. He wanted to not feel the cold knot of anxiety in his stomach when he checked his bank account on the morning of the 3rd. He wanted to be able to book a flight to see his sister without calculating the cost for 6 months. He wanted to walk into a bookstore and buy a hardcover novel without first checking the price on his phone. He wanted, more than anything, a foundation, a sense of ground beneath his feet that was not perpetually shifting sand. His best friend, Mark, lived on the other side of the glass. They had been roommates in college, two bright-eyed kids studying business. But where Leo had sought security, Mark had pursued something else entirely. Mark was not smarter than Leo. He was not more talented, but he operated on a different frequency. While Leo was learning the rules of the game, Mark was studying the metagame, the unspoken, often brutal principles that governed the rules themselves. Mark had started a niche consulting firm right out of school. It had struggled, nearly failed. And then, through a series of maneuvers Leo found both impressive and slightly unsettling, it had not only survived, but thrived. Now Mark lived in a penthouse apartment that overlooked the city. He drove a car that seemed to be made of polished shadow and ambition. His silence was different. It was the silence of options, of abundance, of a man who owned the ground he walked on. One Tuesday evening, they met for a drink. It was a ritual, a monthly attempt to bridge the ever-widening chasm between their realities. Leo sat at the polished mahogany bar, nervously rotating his glass of beer. Mark sipped a single malt scotch, his posture relaxed, his eyes calmly surveying the room. The company's talking about another round of layoffs, Leo said, the words tasting like ash. Jenny in accounting got let go last week, 20 years. They gave her a severance package that wouldn't cover 3 months of her mortgage. Mark nodded, not unsympathetically, but with a detached analysis that felt like a clinical diagnosis. Companies are not families, Leo. They are organisms. They shed cells to survive. Sentiment is a luxury they can't afford in a downturn. It's not personal. It felt personal to Jenny, Leo countered, the heat rising in his cheeks. It always feels personal to the cell being shed, Mark replied. But it's just biology. The real question is, why are you always positioning yourself as a cell waiting to be shed? Why are you not the one holding the scalpel? Leo laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. That's not who I am, Mark. I'm not a surgeon. Aren't you? Mark's gaze was steady. You just don't like the sight of blood. But the bloodletting happens with or without your approval. Your discomfort doesn't stop the process, it just ensures you're on the table, not standing beside it. He let the silence hang between them for a moment, letting the metaphor sink its teeth in. Look around this bar, Leo. Every person in here is playing a game. Some are playing to not lose. They follow the rules, keep their heads down, and hope the game is fair. They are the ones who stay broke. Others are playing a completely different game. They understand that the rules are not laws of physics. They are suggestions, written by the people who won the last round to give themselves an advantage in the next. They are the ones who get rich. Leo felt a strange mixture of anger and a profound, unsettling curiosity. And what game are you playing? Mark smiled, a thin, knowing curve of his lips. I'm playing the only game there is, the game of power. And you, my friend, are my favorite person, because you prove the most important rule every single day. What rule? Psychological law, Nur 1, the law of internal accounting. Your external financial reality is a perfect mirror of your internal psychology. Poverty is not a lack of money. It is a surplus of limiting beliefs, a deference to false morality, and an emotional attachment to the appearance of goodness over the reality of power. You believe the world owes you a living for your goodness, Mark said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You believe your hard work is a currency the universe is obligated to honor. It's not. The universe is neutral. The market is amoral. It rewards value, leverage, and perceived scarcity. It does not reward virtue. Your goodness is a strategy you're using to feel safe, to avoid the terrifying responsibility of actually wielding power. You stay broke because, on some deep level, you are terrified of what you would have to become to get rich. The words landed not as an insult, but as a key turning in a lock Leo didn't even know existed within him. He felt a door swing open, revealing a dark, cold corridor. He was terrified to step into it, but for the first time, the quiet, desperate silence of his own life felt more frightening than the unknown. The conversation with Mark festered in Leo's mind like a virus. It infected everything. He began to see his life not as a series of unfortunate circumstances, but as a meticulously constructed prison of his own design. His hard work was not a virtue, it was a pacifier. His honesty was not a strength, it was a shield he used to avoid negotiating for more. His fear of being seen as greedy was, as Mark had implied, a deep-seated terror of his own potential for power. He started to read, not the business self-help books he used to skim, but the source material. He downloaded the prints. He read Sun Tzu's The Art of War. He consumed biographies of men like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and modern-day titans. He was not looking for motivational quotes. He was looking for a blueprint of the human engine, a schematic of how power truly flowed in the world, unseen by most. He began to see the patterns. Machiavelli's core lesson was not, as popular culture believed, the ends justify the means. It was far more subtle and devastating. A man who strives after goodness in every act will surely come to ruin among so many who are not good. Therefore, a ruler must learn how not to be good. Leo translated this into his own life. An employee who strives after being liked, secure, and morally pure in every act will surely come to ruin among a system designed for profit, not for his personal salvation. His first application of this new logic was small, almost insignificant. A project manager, Brenda, tried to dump an urgent, low-value task on his desk. The old Leo would have sighed, resented it, but ultimately done it. He was a team player. The new Leo saw it for what it was, a power move, a test of his boundaries, an attempt to consume his time, his most non-renewable resource, for her benefit. He looked at Brenda, his expression calm, his voice even. "I understand the urgency, Brenda. However, my current priorities are aligned with the Henderson project, which has a direct impact on Q4 revenue. I don't have the bandwidth to take that on without compromising my primary deliverables. Perhaps you could delegate it to the intern or handle it yourself." Brenda blinked, stunned. She was used to Leo's compliance. His refusal was not aggressive, but it was an immovable object. She sputtered, "But the team's success is dependent on us focusing on high-impact work," Leo replied, echoing a phrase he'd heard his CEO use. "This doesn't qualify." He turned back to his screen, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had just drawn a line in the sand. The sky did not fall. Brenda, flustered, took the task and walked away. A small amount of power, infinitesimal but real, had shifted from her to him. It was intoxicating. He began to apply this cold calculus to his finances. He saw his budget not as a list of restrictions, but as a balance sheet of power leaks. His car payment was a tribute he paid to the bank for the appearance of status, a status no one cared about. He sold the car, bought a reliable, 5-year-old used model for cash, and liberated $400 a month. That money was no longer a cost. It was a soldier. He redirected it. He analyzed his job. He was not being paid for his hard work. He was being paid for the value he was perceived to create. He stopped taking on invisible tasks that helped the team. Instead, he identified one high-visibility project that was floundering, a new client acquisition campaign that everyone was afraid of. He volunteered to lead it. He didn't work harder. He worked smarter. He focused all his energy on this single, visible battle. He made sure every report, every update, highlighted his strategic thinking and its direct link to potential revenue. He wasn't just doing a job. He was crafting a narrative of indispensability. Psychological law number 2. The principle of perceived value. Price is never about the objective cost. It is about the story you tell about the value. To command a high price, you must first create an aura of scarcity and necessity around your offerings. You must become the obvious, and only, solution to a pressing problem. 6 months later, the campaign was a modest success. Not a home run, but a solid double. In his annual review, his manager Susan gave him the standard praise and the standard 3% raise. The old Leo would have smiled, said thank you, and left feeling slightly defeated. The new Leo was prepared. He had a dossier. He had printed out graphs showing the campaign's metrics, emails from the satisfied client, and a comparison of his contributions to others at his level. He was calm, cold. "Susan, thank you," he said, not smiling. "But a 3% raise is below inflation. It's effectively a pay cut. More importantly, it doesn't reflect the value I've delivered this year." He slid the dossier across the table. "I led the Patterson account from a 10% chance of renewal to a signed 3-year contract, representing an estimated $900,000 in lifetime value. I did that with minimal support, navigating internal obstacles that would have sunk a less determined lead. My market value, based on these deliverables and current industry rates, is at least 20% higher than my current compensation." Susan was taken aback. This was not the Leo she knew. "Leo, we have salary bands, budgets." "I understand constraints," Leo interrupted, his voice still calm. "But I am not a constraint. I am an asset. And assets that generate this level of return need to be appreciated, or they find a new portfolio. I like it here. I want to stay. But I will not subsidize this company's success with my own financial stagnation. I need a 15% raise effective immediately and a title change to senior strategist. He held her gaze. He was not angry. He was not emotional. He was a force of nature stating a fact. He had created a problem for her, the problem of losing him. That was now greater than the problem of giving him a raise. He had made himself scarce and necessary in that single moment. He got the raise and the title. His monthly take-home pay increased by over $700. Combined with the savings from the car, he now had a war chest of over $1,000 a month. He didn't buy a new television. He began to study investing. He didn't follow the crowd. He looked for assets that were undervalued, misunderstood. He bought a small parcel of land in a rural area everyone was ignoring because he'd read about a future infrastructure project. He was no longer a consumer. He was an accumulator. His transformation was not external. He didn't buy new clothes or become arrogant. The change was internal, a quiet hardening, a shift in perception. He saw the strings that pulled the puppets of the world, and he had started to pull a few of his own. People began to treat him differently. They listened more. They interrupted less. Respect, he realized, was not given. It was commanded. The final, complete metamorphosis happened during a crisis. The company lost its biggest client. Panic ensued. Layoffs were imminent. The building was thick with fear, a palpable scent of desperation. The old Leo would have been paralyzed, updating his resume in a frantic sweat. The new Leo saw opportunity. Chaos was a ladder. He requested a meeting with the senior partners. He walked into the boardroom, a room he had only ever entered to serve coffee during meetings as an intern years ago. The faces around the table were grim, tired. "We're facing a significant challenge," the managing partner began. "We have to make some difficult decisions to ensure the survival of the firm." Leo waited for the right moment. When the talk turned to cutting marketing budgets and personnel, he spoke. "Cutting is a defensive strategy," he said, his voice cutting through the gloom. "It's what you do when you've accepted defeat. It shrinks the company, it destroys morale, and it tells the market we're dying." "Do you have a better idea?" one of the partners snapped, his patience worn thin. "Yes," Leo said. He laid out a plan. It was brutal. It was brilliant. It was pure Machiavelli. He proposed they don't just accept the layoffs, they weaponize them. They use the crisis to purge the company of low-performing, long-tenured employees who were draining resources, the loyal Jennies of the world. They take the severance money and instead of spreading it thin, they offer generous packages to a few key disgruntled employees of their two main competitors, poaching them to bring over their client books. "We're not shrinking," Leo concluded. "We're using this crisis as cover to become leaner, meaner, and to launch a targeted attack on our competitors while they think we're weak. We trade our weak cells for their strong ones. We don't play defense, we attack." The silence in the room was absolute. They were horrified, and they were captivated. It was ruthless. It was immoral. It was also the only intelligent thing anyone had said in weeks. Psychological law, there are three. The strategy of creative destruction. True power is never built by simply building. It is built by strategically destroying the old, the weak, and the obsolete. A crisis is not a threat to be survived. It is a tool to be wielded. It is the fog of war behind which you can execute your most radical maneuvers, shielded from the judgment of a morality that only exists in times of peace. They didn't implement his plan exactly, but they implemented the spirit of it. The layoffs were more surgical, more strategic. They did poach two key people from a competitor. Leo was put in charge of the new, aggressive business development unit. His salary was doubled. He was given equity. He had become the one holding the scalpel. The moment he walked out of that boardroom, he was a different species of man. The last vestiges of the old Leo, the one who believed in fairness, in the reward of hard work for its own sake, in the safety of compliance, were gone, surgically removed. He felt no guilt. He felt a profound, chilling clarity. He had looked into the heart of the game, accepted its rules, and he had won. 5 years later, Leo sat in his own study. The silence was the rich, potent kind. The windows looked out over a private garden, not a noisy street. The books on his shelves were not for show. They were manuals, each one a tool that had helped him re-engineer his reality. He had left the company a year after the crisis, using his newfound reputation and capital to start his own boutique firm. It was not a passion project. It was a machine for converting strategic insight into wealth. He was rich. Not Mark rich, not yet, but he was on the path. He owned assets that generated income while he slept. His time was his own. His anxiety was gone, replaced by a constant, low hum of calculation. He had what he had always wanted, a foundation. But he had built it with tools his former self would have been terrified to even touch. He thought of Jenny from accounting sometimes. He heard she had never recovered, that she had lost her house and was working a series of temp jobs. The old Leo would have been racked with guilt. The new Leo saw her fate as a necessary lesson. She was a casualty of a war she didn't know she was in. Her goodness had been her only strategy, and it had failed her utterly. He had learned the forbidden truth. The world does not operate on the morality we preach in churches and schools. It operates on the cold, hard calculus of power. Money flows not to the most virtuous, but to the most perceptive, the most strategic, the most willing to see things as they are, not as they should be. Machiavelli was right. A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to ruin among so many who are not good. Leo had chosen not to be good. He had chosen to be effective. He had chosen to be powerful. He had learned that poverty is a mindset before it is a condition. It is a belief in scarcity, a fear of conflict, a worship of false idols like fairness and security. Wealth is the opposite. It is a mindset of abundance, a willingness to engage in conflict, an understanding that security is an illusion, and the only true safety lies in your own ability to create value and defend your position. The phone rang. It was Mark. "Heard you closed the Davis deal," Mark said. There was a new note in his voice. Not condescension, but respect. The respect of one general for another. "I did," Leo replied. "You've come a long way from that bar, my friend." Leo looked out at the gathering dusk. "I just finally opened my eyes." He had. He had seen that the world is divided into two types of people: those who accept the reality they are given, and those who dissect that reality, understand its hidden mechanics, and reassemble it to their own advantage. The first group stays broke. The second group makes the rules, and in doing so, ensures the wealth flows in their direction. It is not fair. It is not moral. It is simply the truth. And the truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. It can only be obeyed. He was no longer on the wrong side of the glass. He was the glass, and he was utterly, permanently, unbreakably cold. He ended the call and sat in the deepening quiet of his study. The transformation was complete, but its maintenance was a daily practice. It was a constant vigilance against the seductive pull of old patterns, the siren song of comfort and compliance. He opened a ledger, not a digital spreadsheet, but a physical, leather-bound book where he tracked not just finances, but his strategic positioning. This was his power grid, a concept he'd developed. On one page were his assets, his firm, his investments, his network of influential contacts, his growing reputation for ruthless efficiency. On the opposing page were his vulnerabilities, competitors, changing market trends, emotional attachments that could be used as leverage against him, the ever-present risk of his own compassion returning like a dormant disease. Tonight, a new entry was needed in the vulnerability column. His father had called. His mother's health was declining. The medical bills, even with insurance, were becoming a sinkhole. The old Leo would have liquidated assets, sent the money immediately, and felt the warm glow of filial duty. The new Leo saw a threat vector. This was an emotional play, a drain on his resources that could escalate unpredictably. It was a test of his new principles. He made a decision, cold and clean as a surgical incision. He would not give them money. Money was a temporary patch. Instead, He would use his power to reconfigure the entire situation to his long-term advantage. He would move his parents into a smaller, more manageable property he would purchase in his own name, an asset that would appreciate. He would negotiate directly with the hospital's billing department, using the threat of taking his future business elsewhere to secure a substantial discount. He would turn an emotional liability into a strategic acquisition and a demonstration of power. There was no guilt. There was only the relentless optimization of outcomes. This was the final, unspoken Machiavellian principle, the sovereign mind. The ultimate power is not over others, but over one's own humanity. To become a true prince of your destiny, you must be willing to sacrifice the sentimental self on the altar of results. Your heart must become a calculated and rarely used weapon. He picked up his pen and began to write his plan. The silence in the room was no longer just rich. It was absolute. It was the sound of a man who had conquered his last and greatest enemy, himself. He was no longer just playing a different game. He had become the game master. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that he would never be broke again. The following week, Leo executed his plan regarding his parents with the precision of a military campaign. He did not ask. He informed. He presented the move not as a choice, but as the only logical solution. His father, a man steeped in the old world of polite requests and shared burdens, was bewildered and then resentful. "This is your mother," his father said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger over the phone. "We're not one of your business deals. You can't just manage us." "That's precisely what I'm doing," Leo replied, his tone devoid of heat. "The current situation is inefficient and financially unsustainable. It creates risk and emotional turbulence that impacts my ability to generate the resources needed to solve this problem permanently. My solution addresses the root cause. The emotions are irrelevant." The word irrelevant hung in the air like a slap. It was the truest declaration of his new philosophy. He had moved beyond good and evil, into the realm of pure cause and effect. He purchased the condo. He strong-armed the hospital into a 30% reduction in outstanding bills. He established a strict, limited monthly allowance for his parents, framed not as support but as a budget for operational expenses. He had turned a heart-wrenching family crisis into a clean, controlled, and ultimately profitable subsidiary of his own empire. The love he once felt was now a distant memory, a soft, weak thing he had surgically removed. In its place was a sense of profound, unassailable control. This incident became a core part of his internal legend. He reflected on it often, refining the principle. The final barrier to ultimate power is not external opposition. It is the internal allegiance to a sentimental identity. He had shed his. His business, Ascendant Strategy, grew not through marketing, but through a reputation for delivering brutal, unambiguous results. He didn't advertise. He allowed a carefully curated narrative of his effectiveness and his ruthlessness to circulate in the right circles. He became a ghost story that CEOs told each other. If you need to win and you don't care about the collateral damage, you call Leo. He was hired by a struggling tech startup to handle a series of layoffs. The founder, a young, idealistic man named Ben, wanted to be compassionate. "We need to give them generous severance, outplacement services. We owe them that," Ben pleaded in their first meeting. Leo looked at him with the detached interest of a biologist studying a fascinating but doomed organism. "You owe them nothing. Your obligation is to the remaining employees and to the shareholders. Generosity is perceived as weakness and guilt. It invites lawsuits. It tells the survivors that failure is rewarded. We will offer the legal minimum. We will have security escort them from the building. We will immediately announce a restructured, more ambitious vision for the future to the team that remains. You are not conducting a funeral. You are performing surgery. The patient is the company. The cells being removed are infected. Do you mourn the cancer cells you cut out?" Ben was pale, but he was listening. He was being seduced by the cold, hard logic of it. Leo continued, his voice a low, persuasive drone. "This is the price of the throne, Ben. You wanted to be a king. Kings do not apologize for saving their kingdom. They execute the traitors and celebrate the victory. Your sentimentality is a luxury you can no longer afford. It is the reason you are here, on the brink of failure, talking to me. He won the contract. He executed the layoffs with a chilling efficiency that was later described in a news article as corporate psychopathy. The company's stock, freed from the weight of its excess cells, rallied. Ben, transformed and hardened, sent Leo a bonus that was twice his agreed fee. The note read, "Thank you for the education." Leo was no longer just a businessman. He was a corrupter of souls, a merchant of dark enlightenment. And business was booming. He began to diversify his power base. He used his profits to quietly acquire a small, faltering local newspaper. His peers thought it was a strange, sentimental vanity project. They were wrong. He didn't care about journalism. He cared about narrative. He understood that in the modern world, perception was the ultimate reality. He now owned a machine that could shape it. He could quietly bury stories about his clients or himself, or he could launch subtle, devastating attacks on his competitors under the guise of public interest. It was a lever of power more potent than any single financial asset. One evening, Mark requested a meeting. It was at Leo's club, a place of deep leather chairs and whispered conversations where power was the only currency. Mark looked older. The easy confidence was still there, but it was frayed at the edges. The market had shifted, and one of his key investments had turned sour. "I need a perspective," Mark said, swirling the brandy in his glass. "The Vornoff deal is collapsing. I'm looking at a 7-figure loss." Leo listened, saying nothing. He observed the slight tremor in Mark's hand, the tightness around his eyes. This was not the master teaching the student anymore. This was one prince appealing to another, more stable throne. "Your problem isn't the Vornoff deal," Leo said finally. "Your problem is that you became predictable. You won for a decade using the same set of plays. The market learned you. It adapted. Now you're being outmaneuvered by people who studied your game." "So what's the move?" Mark asked, a hint of desperation in his voice. "The move," Leo said, leaning forward, "is to do what you taught me years ago. Stop playing their game. Change the board." He outlined a ruthless plan. Let the Vornoff deal fail. Don't try to save it. Use the ensuing chaos and the drop in his competitor's stock price to launch a hostile takeover bid for them. Use the newspaper to plant stories about their mismanagement. Poach their key executive, the one who was actually causing Mark all the trouble, by offering him a kingdom of his own. You don't fix a leaking ship, Mark. You scuttle it and use the insurance money to buy a faster, better-armed frigate. Mark stared at him, a complex mixture of awe and fear in his eyes. "My God, Leo, that's brilliant. And monstrous." Leo leaned back, a faint, cold smile on his lips. "You were the one who told me the universe doesn't reward virtue. You just never fully internalized it. You played at being Machiavellian. I became him." It was the final transfer of power between them. The student had not only surpassed the master, he had consumed him. Mark left the meeting with a new plan, but he also left with the chilling understanding that he had created something far more potent and dangerous than he had ever intended. Leo's life became a symphony of controlled influence. He was a node in a network of power. His newspaper, his firm, and his investments all working in concert. He was invited to sit on boards of directors. Politicians sought his counsel and his discreet financial backing. He never gave donations. He made investments, expecting specific legislative favors in return. He had learned that true wealth wasn't just having money. It was having the power to change the rules to make more money. He encountered his old manager, Susan, at a charity gala. She was still at the firm, now a senior vice president clinging to her corner of the corporate ladder. She looked tired. She greeted him with a nervous, deferential warmth. "Leo, you look, well, everyone talks about your amazing success." "Thank you, Susan," he said, his handshake brief and firm. "It's a matter of focus." "You know," she said, lowering her voice, "the partners, they sometimes regret letting you go. They say the company lost its edge." The company didn't let me go, Susan. He corrected her calmly. I outgrew it, and it didn't lose its edge. It never had one. It had a butter knife, and I was the one who brought the steel. He excused himself a moment later. The interaction was a data point, a confirmation of his trajectory. He was no longer part of their world. He was above it. Years flowed into years. The initial frantic energy of his ascent settled into a permanent, granite-like stability. He married, not for love, but for a strategic alliance with a woman from an old money family who provided social legitimacy to complement his financial power. They had an understanding, a contract of mutual benefit. They were partners in the empire, not lovers in a home. He had children, and he raised them with the same dispassionate logic. He taught them chess, not checkers. He taught them about assets and liabilities before they could read. Their bedtime stories were parables about leverage and negotiation. One night, sitting in his study, now in a house that was more of a fortress than a home, he received a notification. The land he had bought years ago, the rural parcel, had been acquired by the government for the newly confirmed infrastructure project. The payout was 50 times his initial investment. It was the final monumental piece of validation. Every principle he had adopted, every cold calculation, every shred of humanity he had sacrificed had been correct. He felt no joy. Joy was a spasm of the nervous system, a fleeting, irrational emotion. He felt satisfaction, the confirmation of a correct hypothesis. He looked at his reflection in the darkened window. The face that looked back was sharp, intelligent, and utterly impassive. The kindness was gone from the eyes, replaced by a flat, calculating calm. The man who had worried about his bank account, who had felt anxiety over a flat tire, was a ghost, a story about someone else. He had won. He had absolute financial security. He commanded fear and respect without saying a word. He had a family that was a dynasty in waiting. He had everything the old Leo had ever wanted. And in the profound, expensive silence of his perfect, powerful life, he contemplated the final, haunting truth that Nietzsche had warned about. Beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. The abyss had not just gazed into Leo, it had moved in. It had furnished the space. It had become him. He felt nothing, and in that nothingness he knew he had paid the ultimate price for his wealth. He had traded his soul for it. And the most terrifying part, the thought that would have broken the old Leo but merely intrigued the new one, was the cold, hard assessment that it had been a worthwhile trade. He was rich. He was powerful. He was free from the desperation of his past. And he was, in every way that truly mattered, completely and utterly broke.